Conversations on effective conservation with Astrid Vargas, recovering the black-footed ferret in the United States.
This is the first audio from the interview that we had with Astrid Vargas in Gonalezú National Park on October of 2023. Astrid Vargas has an amazing experience in leading teams for really critically endangered species. She was born in Puerto Rico, she grew up in Spain, she studied wildlife veterinary, and then she moved to the United States to work with the black-footed ferret, which at that time was the most endangered mammal in the world. Later on, she worked in Spain with Iberian lynx, which at that time was the most endangered cat in the world. And at the end, in the third audio, we will hear about her experience working with several organizations on a landscape-scale conservation program. On this first audio, we will hear about Astrid's experience working with the black-footed ferret. At the beginning, we will hear about the context and the biology of the black-footed ferret as an endangered species, who's a specialist living in prairie ecosystems. And later, she will describe her experience, her perspective, being inside the black-footed ferret recovery team for the US Fish and Wildlife Service. Most of the people that we interview, they work for NGOs. In this case, Astrid's experience with the black-footed ferret and with Iberian lynx, she was working for governments.
The black-footed ferret was at the time the most endangered carnivore in the world. There were 10 individuals left. It was considered pretty much extinct. And we're going to talk about what happened to recover from the brink of extinction, to recover this species. And Ignacio wants to talk more about management and leadership, but also intra-agency and interagency situations. So the black-footed ferret, Mustela nigripes, I'm going to just introduce a little bit the biology of the species, very endangered carnivore that depends on one single prey. It only eats prairie dogs, and that makes it a hyper-specialist and therefore very vulnerable to extinction.
It was the most endangered mammal actually in the world.
Yeah.
At this time.
At the time.
Black-footed ferret.
Black-footed. What it is, prairie dogs. Prairie dogs are like big, fat ground squirrels that are bigger than them. They have to tackle. It's like, a lion and a wildebeest, a black-footed ferret that is about 1.5 kilos, 170, 700, and a prairie dog is 2.5 kilos. So they're very ferocious. Yeah, the only thing they eat. You can give them a hamster and they'll eat if they're hungry, but if they have to choose, they prefer that. After hearing about the context of the black-footed ferret challenge and the species, its biology, now we're going to hear how Astrid got involved there. We edited a long part in which she explained her history, but just to give a summary, by the time we start hearing her telling her story, she was working for the Smithsonian Institution, the National Zoo in Washington. She studied there as an intern. She studied a PhD on the behavior of the black-footed ferret. Now we start her story with her highlighting the diversity of people working in the National Zoo. Later, she will focus on her experience working for the species in Wyoming. You can imagine a not very tall Latin woman in such a remote state of the United States as Wyoming that is not used to this kind of roles. And also she talks a lot about Pet Gober, who was the species coordinator for the US Fish and Wildlife Service, and how he takes very smart decisions to turn the program around that was not working very well and to improve the condition of the species. And then coming from all over the world, it was so inspirational to interact with all these cultures, Bhutan and South Africa and so many places. So after 6 months they offered me a job
And this was a lab job. And I ended up doing a lot of jobs that were not interesting. And that's so important for everybody to know what you don't want. It's like, okay, I want to work with wildlife. Oh, vet medicine? No. Reproductive physiology is interesting, but no, I want to work with the wild. I want to be outside. And so anyway, they brought the first black-footed ferrets there. Suddenly there was this super endangered species. There were very few left, and the National Zoo, the Smithsonian Institution, received 5 out of the 10. At some point there were 10 individuals left in the world, and they were starting to reproduce them. So I thought, this really tickles me. So I'd love to volunteer for that. I volunteered, and eventually there was an opportunity for a PhD. So I had to take the GREs and all these exams in the States, como se dice, bring up my English, and finally I got it. I got the scholarship and was able to go to Wyoming, of all places. So it's cowboy land in the middle of the boonies. So if you think about young girl from Spain, from the city, suddenly in the boonies of cowboy land. And it was just a shock. But anyways, I was accepted to do a PhD, and I developed a PhD on behavior. And I wanted to learn how do we have to train these animals? What kind of behaviors are important for survival? Predation, this is a predator and it's a prey. It has a lot of enemies like the great horned owls and the coyotes, and it needs to run away and escape from them, but at the same time, it needs to kill a very powerful opponent, which is a predator. So I thought, I'm going to study predation, and I'm going to try to see what do we need to do to train these animals for survival. So I did my PhD for 4 years studying this, and then when I finished, it's like, enough. They said, congratulations for getting a PhD on biopolitics, because there's a lot of biology, but it's plagued with politics. There's so many interests at so many levels, from the federal government to the local government to the tribal groups. So it was behavior of humans too. What in those 4 years, as a young Spanish girl, I was like studying the behavior of humans too. It's like not only the ferrets. It's like, wow, this is very powerful. You know, you say big hats in small heads. It was a little bit like the cowboys. No, they go with their big hats, but it was a lot of strutting around. And anyway, so learning how to move in this environment. When I finished, it's like, I want to get the hell out of here. I want to go and see the world. And this is something I wanted to mention, is like, my passion was wildlife and my passion was traveling. How could I mix those? And I'm going to, one thing I think is so important for all of us, and I think here everybody has it, you have to lead from your gut. Where is your gut taking you, and why, and how do you get there? So it's like, okay, I finished my PhD, I'm done with the States, I'm going to go to see the world. I went to Siberia studying tigers with some friends. When then I came back, I got propositions for 2 postdocs. The way conservation works in the United States, you have the US Fish and Wildlife Service has the mandate to protect endangered species under the Endangered Species Act. And for very endangered species, well, you have different sections. Anyways, that to protect a very endangered species, you have to make it experimental, non-essential. Whatever you do with them is an experiment. So nobody is going to get fried for if a ferret dies in their land or something like that. And then there is the local government, which is where the ferrets were, in Wyoming. And the local government, in the links, it happened the same, that these are my ferrets. These are the Wyoming ferrets, and they are not, and we don't want the federal government to tell us what to do. So there was a guy, which was the state veterinarian, big cowboy, and he was very toxic. He hated researchers. It was a difficult man. And so when I left, finished the ferrets, and I was thinking, I'm going to see the world because I want to explore the world, then the recovery coordinator, he was a new recovery coordinator, came to me and said, you know, we're going to debunk like the Pope of the ferrets by upgrading him. So we're going to get rid of him by giving him a more up position that takes him out of the black-footed ferrets. It's like, oh wow, that's very smart. You know, a good way to get rid of him is upgrade him. And I want you in his place. It's like, me? You? I'm Spanish, like short, like small, and I'm a woman. How it's like, it requires a pair of balls from a man to decide to get me to replace this big old cowboy. So then I said, no, I don't want the job. And I just want to go travel. And he said, this is your one in a lifetime opportunity to do what you've always wanted to do, which is to change the ferret program around. So I give you this opportunity and just think about it. And then it's like, oh, fucker, man, this is right. You know, this is a unique opportunity, but I want to go to China or Chile or wherever. And I said, okay, negotiate. That's the second thing. First thing, lead from your heart and never be afraid of anything. And wherever your heart takes you or your gut, just go there. And this, I was completely divided. But the second is negotiate. You always have leverage to negotiate. No matter how small you are, you can always pull the leverage. And I said, okay, if you want me, I want to explore the world. So I would like 2 months off without pay, which in the States is like, you're crazy because people get 2 weeks vacation a year. So 2 months is like, oh yeah, right, this is absurd, you know, 2 months. It's like, if you go 2 months, but you don't pay me for those 2 months, I use my savings. And in those 2 months, I'm going to explore the world and volunteer in different programs. So he accepted. I negotiated a good salary and a bunch of things, which it was good because I was very young at the time. And he was very willing. He said, I just trust you, and I know I trust you, so I want you for this. And the state of Wyoming was like, what the hell, you're gonna put this Mexican there? It's like, this dirty Mexican. They go, hey, dirty Spaniard, but it doesn't matter, nothing against them. Yeah, because in anybody that speaks Spanish there is from Mexico, right? So it's like, no, it's in another continent, but it doesn't matter. So he was brave to put somebody like me, inexperienced, student, woman, short, with an accent. O sea, perfect for Wyoming. And then it's like, you just do your work, be yourself. He was such a good boss and such a visionary and so smart. And his message to me is like, you be yourself, and when you need an asshole, call me, and I'll be the asshole for you. He's like, okay, good. So I can be myself, and when it gets really nasty and horrible, then Pete can really fight for the situation. So that was how I ended up staying in the black-footed ferret program for a bunch of years, and for 5 more years actually. And we just turned the whole thing around, and it started with the organizational structure. Before it was like vertical. Wyoming Game and Fish and this and the researchers and this and that, and it was like a vertical like that. And it was changed into a completely horizontal thing. So it was divided. There was above an executive committee that was purely political. There were the politicians of all the states where we wanted to reintroduce black-footed ferrets. There were 12 states in the Great Plains of North America. You know, in the Wild West, you had the bison. The bison were wiped out, and then the cattle came in, and the cowboys claimed that cattle break their legs in the prairie dog holes. It's like, oh, come on, you know, the bison dog. And the cattle really look where they step. They are not really, horses can break their legs, but not cattle. So in the end, you have the same Department of Interior was subsidizing the cowboy culture and giving money to cowboys for their cattle. So maybe a calf is, it cost, you know, $800, and the government will give $500 to the cowboy already. So anyways, it was completely subsidized. And at the same time, there comes the ferrets that depend completely on prairie dogs. One thing about prairie dogs is the base of the ecosystem, of the food chain. So it's not only black-footed ferrets, which are specialists, but it's coyote, all sorts of raptors that depend on prairie dogs for survival. When you have prairie dogs in an area, imagine here, this was a prairie dog colony, you would have 38 times the species diversity than in an area with no prairie dogs. So you have these prairie dogs getting hammered by plague and by poisoning. the government is giving lots of money to the cowboys and lots of poison to poison the prairie dogs. And with the prairie dogs goes the whole entire ecosystem. And at the same time, the same Department of Interior in the United States is giving peanuts, but some money, to protect the black-footed ferret because it's critically endangered. So this has the same, it's the same happening in Spain with the lynx, kind of. But anyway, so there were at many different levels, there were a lot of absurd things that needed to be changed. And we had the right person to do that. The recovery coordinator, Pet Gober, he was a visionary. He could think ahead, and most people thought he was crazy. And he wasn't. He was just a very clear-minded, and he formed his own team, and he empowered us in an amazing way. In fact, I had a really horrible thing happening to me in the first time. We were preparing a bunch of ferrets for release in South Dakota. We have the whole South Dakota team. We have the team from the Smithsonian, which the electroejaculation, because we collect sperm from these animals for storage and all that. And there comes this animal. We trapped this giant monster ferret. We've never seen anything as big ever. It's like, oh, we are admiring the animal, what a beauty. And there's this veterinarian, Jogail Howard, who has a lot of experience. Then there was me. It's like, okay, we just inject, we give the anesthesia, and fatapluf, heart arrest. It's like, shit, try to recover it, dead, completely dead. It's like, now what? And there's everybody there, no? It's like, okay, so now what? So I called Pete. It's like, you asked me about the asshole, now we have a problem here. It's like, you keep your head high. Keep your head high up because you haven't done anything wrong. We need to find out what happened to the animal and all that. And so he was always empowering and saying, just don't feel bad about yourself because these things can happen. And you've anesthetized like every other ferret and every ferret. Anyways, the animal had an enlarged heart. He had a heart condition and he was gonna not make it in the long run anyway.
Into too much detail.
Yeah, okay. So, sorry, too much detail. So, ask me a question then, so we can get back in track.
I want to know two things about the black-footed ferret.
Vale.
Stakeholder management and team management.
Okay.
Let's talk about Pet Gober because he had the power that you didn't have.
Yeah.
How did he arrange for what it was a horrible conflict to become an effective program in as few words as possible? And you as a team leader, because that was your first time you were leading a team, what did you learn from Pete that you use with your team and that then you can passed to the other sections of your life? Okay. The situation was very, very ugly politically. What did he do to change it in a way that the people understand it? And what did you learn there managing a team? Because that will bring us to the links.
So first of all...
And also that will bring us to coffee.
Coffee.
Yeah.
I think we need it, all of us. So first was removing the toxic person out of the way by promoting him. That's pretty brilliant. But so it was kind of pissed that he was not with the ferrets, but he was very happy because he was the state veterinarian and he had more status. But no control. He put him in a place where he could not have any management control over the ferret. Second thing he did is change the structure from vertical to horizontal, with an executive committee where we involved all the partners, the Indian tribes. We have 8 Indian tribes involved in the ferret recovery, 12 states from the Great Plains of North America. So all the people with decision-making power were part of this executive committee. And then we had 3 subcommittees, the ex situ, which I handled, the in situ, which was the reintroduction, and the communication and PR and fundraising. So these 3 worked separate, worked within their own, except that the in situ and ex situ, he got 2 people that he knew we were gonna get along like nail and finger, really, which is Mike Lockhart. So he put him as, he trusted both of us and he put us in the same office. So we shared everything. So in situ and ex situ became one together. My part was to coordinate the national facility where we had half of the ferret population. We produced 300 ferrets a year for reintroduction. And so these are big numbers and we were going into detail. And then Mike coordinated the reintroduction efforts. And so it was seamless. It was a very, very easy way to work together with very empowering.
I stop here the audio just to highlight what Astrid is
saying, and how smart Pet Gober was to put in the same room the reintroduction coordinator and the captive breeding coordinator, because typically the two teams, the teams working in the field and the team working in the breeding facilities, they tend to kind of be in different wavelengths and to get into conflict because they come from different training. It's quite normal that the people working in captive breeding are veterinarians, people working in reintroduction are more like field ecologists, they have different worldviews, different perspectives. But in this case, what Pet Gober did is to put them together in the same room, and he chose the two people because he felt, that's what Astrid says, that they will work well together. So just making the reintroduction and the captive breeding people working together in an effective way is an incredible step forward to make the whole program work.
And then another thing is reporting. He was like the 10-15th of Doc Tompkins. Every week we would have a very short report of our things, and then once a month, a little longer, very short to read, but everybody was constantly involved. So what we did is all these things were elevated to the executive committee every 6 months or something like that. And the executive committee would give the funding for one thing or another, or decide when a new reintroduction program was going to be started and all that. So I think that was the...
And regarding team management, do you have anything that you want to share, or you don't remember many things?
It's been 30-something years, so it's been a long time. But
how many people work for you?
7 breeding centers. I have the breeding facility. It wasn't big, maybe it was a team of 10, but then with 7 breeding facilities. So then you have to coordinate efforts, and you have to make sure that all these animals are preconditioned, they are prepared for living in the wild. They need training, they need to learn how to escape from predators, they need to know how to kill prey, and that required a lot of supervision. That, okay, are these animals ready or not? They go through boot camp. So at the end, when that's...
So you were not managing ferrets, you were managing lots of people in different teams.
Wildlife management is people management.
What did you learn there? Or you don't remember?
What do I mean?
I mean, you're managing lots of teams and different groups and people and all that, or which maybe there are some basic principles that you use and you take so much for granted and so natural that for you is like just breathing.
Create harmony, build trust among people. So I learned more about that, especially after I met Jorge. That really inspired me to really dive deep into facilitation. But I think in a natural way I was facilitating a lot of processes. But then I learned so much from you, and then I studied myself that, okay, I'm not a facilitator, I won't ever work as a professional facilitator, but I need facilitation skills for my work. So, and then, listen. I think, Luis said it, I think having a good ear and observe. So no need to speak up. No need to say what you think unless somebody asks you, but just listen. Listen and observe. And I had spent 4 years observing ferrets and humans, so I was well trained for that. So maybe those two. But then, just real quickly before we go to the Iberian lynx, then after that is like my passion. I want to travel, and I want to... during those years with the black-footed ferret, I took those 2 months off. And what I did is I contacted NGOs like WCS. It's like, what are your projects in South America? I'd like to volunteer. So I could go and say, hey, I direct the black-footed ferret ex situ program, and I want to devote 1 or 2 months of my life to you. Whatever you want, I'm here for you. And then people were very welcoming to accept you in their projects and take you to their grandma's house to eat their soup. It's like suddenly you go to South America and I feel at home. I feel like, even though I'm from Spain, in South America, and then you dance and you have so much fun. But this feeling of looking at all these projects in Madidi National Park, I went to Peru, to Bolivia, every year to a different place and volunteer, and that was really big part of my formation. But learning process, learning and exchanging, and then feeling useful. You're not there as a tourist, you're there to help. And that was really, I did that for 4 years, and then finally it's like, okay, I need to travel. I just need to really get on my backpack, and we just pack a little backpack, and for 5 years in a row I live off of my backpack.